Pilot sat the helicopter down to take a few pictures. Note the school gull, a serious predator to penguin chicks and eggs. As these big guys weren't so friendly and some were close to 6 feet tall, we were very careful around them. Helicopters were used to fly us in to photograph identifiable mountain tops, leapfrogging, usually to 20 to 30 miles intervals top to top. At each stop, we got off to measure distances and turn deflection angles to other team members on mountain peaks situated at forward and backward positions. This is a typical camp scene. Here I am with the electric tape in place. Our work out of Byrd Station was mapping surveys, beginning with observations of stars or astro observations to determine latitude and longitude. Following that, in my first 2 seasons, then half my time was working on what was called strain nets. Let me explain. As you may know, all glaciers move, maybe imperceptibly to the eye, but in measurable amounts. There are unstable areas on the Continental Glacier extending over 90 miles out from Byrd Station, where glaciers move in several different directions. Various scientific disciplines wanted to know the directions and the extent of the motion. Some disciplines were working close to our poles, which would give them a particular latitude and longitude location for their work at the completion of our measurements. The Ohio State team, for instance, was doing gravity studies. A strain net is a system that consisted of 2 parallel lines of poles to be permanently set in the ice. The lines were 3 kilometers apart with poles placed at 3-kilometer intervals. For my first season, my team and I were tasked to complete the second half of these 2 approximately 90-mile long lines that had been started the previous season. The poles had to be set into about 4 feet of ice every 3 kilometers. They were 16-foot 4x4s, about 105 total. A 6-foot high wooden tower was constructed to allow for observations for observers to see the distant pole forward, backward, and diagonal measurements across to the other line. The high towers were mounted on skids, one on each line, and towed from pole site to pole site by the nodwell as close to the pole as possible. The towers were then pushed manually as close as possible into position, but importantly, without touching the set pole itself. The measuring instruments used were theodolites and electrotapes, which required a person on the tower at one point and a person with a receiver at the next one. Each pole on the 2 lines had to be measured in 3 directions, so the angles of each triangle between the 2 lines totaled 180 degrees. All these measurements required a lot of redundancy for accuracy. Winds much of the time impacted the time we needed to obtain accuracy in all directions within 2 seconds of a degree. The settings of these 100+ poles took us about 6 weeks. I have some interesting details of similar work we did in my second season that enabled us to complete twice as much work in the same amount of time. To my overwhelming surprise, in the middle of the movie's production, my son Chris found report number 48, published by the Ohio State scientists and Institute of Polar Studies, titled Analysis of the Byrd Station Strain Net, Antarctica, which fully describes the construction of the strain net and its use. The report described our observations and measurements to establish the 52 observed quadrilaterals of 3 kilometers on each side, resulting in precise latitudes and longitudes for each 106 poles we established. Upon the completion of our work, helicopters were turned over to geologists for their studies. While this work might sound pretty straightforward to you, Remember, we often had to deal with severe weather conditions, which hindered our progress. The helicopter pilots all had the highest level of skills needed to work in the harsh environment. Landing a helicopter in high wind on a steep mountain slope was tricky. Upon entering the facility at the base one day, I found the base commander extremely upset. He had lost radio contact with both of his helicopters in the field. Several hours later, one of the pilots reported that the other copter had crashed with his geologist passengers. Fortunately, no injuries were reported. Later, after they returned to the heli station, the pilot of the crashed helicopter clicked his heels and saluted the commander, saying, "Major, I just destroyed a $300,000 copter. Is there anything else I can do for you today?" The major looked at him in disgust and said, "Only, no, go take a pill and go to bed." Ice formed on my beard from working hard outdoors, and the tan is really a windburn. I am doing astro observations, star shots, on equipment called a DKM-3 theodolite. These two pictures are me measuring distances with an electrotape. I am turning angles with a wild T3 theodolite. Any type of surveying equipment must be winterized with all lubricants removed before they can be used in these low temperatures. If not removed, the instruments become too stiff to use. Management was pretty good to us, even flying over and dropping Thanksgiving dinner with all the trimmings to us. All we had to do was reheat everything on a grill or stove in the personnel carrier. When out in the field, we are required to check in by radio daily to let base know all was well. A plane would be flown out to check on our well-being if we didn't call in. We could also prompt a mail delivery by purposely not calling in. Here is a typical camp scene showing the snowed-in tent and a water maker. The second picture shows us cooking steaks. The odometer wheel on the side of the nodwell was used to gauge the 3 kilometers between post settings. We have completed the strain net and they are heading back to Byrd Station. Team photo, left to right, is of Al Zazas, Zeke Souza, Charlie Morrison, and me. We celebrated back at Byrd Station at the end of the season. I'm in the barracks and weather station at Byrd Station. The station was built as a series of quonses in a trench dug deeply and later covered with drifting snow. Because I was planning to work outside, I asked the weatherman what it was like, thinking he should know. His answer was, "I don't know. I haven't been outside in 2 months." Hair cutting time with Charlie Morrison. These 4 people were part of the 8 USGS volunteer team to go to the Antarctic that year. They are Bruce Swartz, Tom Taylor, Merle Southern, and me, with the Wild T2 on the observation hill. Due to ice building up intervening years, only about 3 to 4 feet of the poles still were visible on my second season 3 years later. 16-foot 4x4 wood extensions had to be banded to the existing remainder of the old post for continued scientific studies. Our team was told to construct similar wood towers, but high enough now to observe tops of the extended poles. I came into this assignment late and didn't have any input in the plan in West Virginia. I knew from the effort needed previously to deal with cumbersome and heavy wood towers that were only 6 feet high, that having to tow wood towers 12 feet high to get observers up to the 16 to 17 foot level desired would be almost impossible to tow efficiently and handle manually. The 16-foot long 4x4s sent from the US seemed to be of a quality suitable only for crate construction, rather than being of a good quality hardwood and suitable for the heavy work to be done in the harsh Antarctic environment. I thought of installing an upright steel tower bolted right onto the front bumper of the Nodwell. The Navy supply facility at McMurdo had all the supplies we wanted, down to the last bolt. They told us we could have anything we needed. This was amazing support. It enabled my team and me to build the tall steel towers. The Nodwells and tower parts were flown in C-130s the 500 miles to Byrd Station, where we assembled them. You can see details of the construction in these shots. The observation platform, cabling, observation equipment, and supporting members. We solved a stabilization problem when setting these 4x4 posts, as seen here. With the use of 3 12-foot steel rods, we welded a steel shoe on one end and sharpened the other end to a sharp point. One member stood on the tower, holding the top of the pole in position. Another man pushed the rods into the ice, equal distance around the post at 120 degrees, and laid the upper end gently against the post. The 3 rods held the post perfectly stable. Was the construction successful? By all means, yes. The 16 to 17 foot wood posts were much more stable when observing, especially for accuracy. We could move the steel towers much more easily and quickly, being bolted to the personnel carrier. The results were that our team completed in 1 season what would have taken 2 seasons with the wood towers. Here's a good example of a typical camp setting in my 2nd season. Tucker Snowcat was used by the Ohio State scientists. My Nodwell personnel carrier is beside our tents. In front is a 1-ton sled loaded with 4x4 wood posts and showing the odometer. The second photo shows the Nodwell and all of our tents. The construction of the Scott tent has not changed since Scott used them. The tent uses 4 heavy wooden poles that are at least 2.5 inches thick and 12 feet long. The tent covering is a double thickness, heavy canvas that provides a dead air space. Around the outside is a 3-foot wide canvas apron on which we place blocks of ice to hold down the tent. I know from personal experience that this arrangement will withstand 100-mile-per-hour winds. The vent at the top looks like a sock flapping in the wind. The drawback with the tent is that it is not fireproof and has been known to burn up in a matter of minutes. This is our mechanic driving